classy white woman boards a first-class flight, only to snatch the seat from a black woman sitting silently by the window. She says confidently, "This is not your seat." But just a few minutes later, when the woman smiles and says softly, "I'm the one who founded this airline," the whole cabin falls silent. Have you ever been judged because of the color of your skin, the way you look, or the way you dress? If so, would you keep quiet to keep the peace, or would you stand up to maintain your dignity? Have you ever wondered, in a world filled with prejudice, pride, and humanity, what really makes a person noble? Today's story is not just about an occupied chair, but about self-respect, about tolerance, and about how one person chooses to stand firm in the midst of a storm of prejudice. Join me on this emotional journey, and if you believe that justice and dignity still deserve to be defended, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join me in starting the story. White woman snatched black CEO's seat, then turned pale. When she said, "I built this airline." The morning at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport was bathed in the hazy light of a spring desert. Arizona sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, reflecting off the marble floors, sparkling like salt on water. In the small cafe near Gate D7, Ava Morrison sat alone, her hands gently cupping a steaming cup of latte. No one knows that the woman wearing a simple white shirt, braided hair, and an old watch is the founder and CEO of Nova Air, the airline that is making the whole of America rethink the definition of fair service. Ava loved mornings like this, hidden among the crowds. No secretaries, no cameras, no meetings waiting, just the sound of suitcase wheels rolling and the faint scent of burning coffee in the air. She's kept that habit since the early days of her career when Nova Air was just a dream in her small Tempe apartment, with a few diagrams and a whiteboard plastered on the walls. "To understand customers, you have to live like them," she once said. Sometimes, Ava would book a ticket under a fake name, boarding the plane as a regular passenger to see how her employees treated others. Same thing this morning. Nova 227 to New York, JFK, taking off at 8:15. Ava booked seat 1A, the first window seat, first class. She planned to jot down some notes for tomorrow morning's board meeting in Manhattan, an important meeting, one that could change the direction of the company. She opened her laptop and checked the customer care metrics, Q1 report. Satisfaction among Black and Latino customers was up 17%. Ava smiled slightly. Those numbers, to her, were not just an achievement. They were a sign of growing equity. An announcement sounded Nova 227 to New York. Now boarding Group 1. She hung up and picked up her suitcase. Before standing up, Ava glanced at the reflection behind the bar. There was something strange about the eyes in the mirror, tired and peaceful, a mixture of triumph and wariness. As she stepped out of the restaurant, she noticed a group of passengers gathered near the gate. High heels clicked firmly on the floor. A white woman with slightly curled blonde hair, wearing a camel coat and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag, walked briskly toward her. Beside her was a man in a dark blue suit. He seemed to be her assistant. The woman spoke loudly, her voice drawling and overly confident. "Where's my boarding group? I'm supposed to be in Group 1. Elizabeth Crane. First-class ticket." The counter clerk nodded, checking politely. Ava heard the name, frowning slightly. She had heard it somewhere before. Maybe in internal emails the name Elizabeth Crane, a financial advisor mentioned by several board members, famous in the world of corporate restructuring and notorious for cutting thousands of jobs to optimize profits. Ava didn't mind. She walked up to the counter, scanned her ticket, and nodded to the clerk. "Good morning, Ms. Morrison." He smiled. "Have a safe flight." As she walked down the stairs to the plane, Ava took a deep breath. She always loved that moment, the smell of metal, the smell of fuel, the cold air conditioning wafting from the cabin. It reminded her why she started, for the feeling of freedom and the ability to take people where they belonged. As she entered first class, she looked around 8 ash-gray leather seats, soft yellow lighting, so quiet she could hear the click of the seat belts. Ava placed her suitcase in the overhead compartment and sat down in seat 1A next to the window. Next, she pulled out a copy of Forbes magazine, last month's issue. The cover was The Women Who Are Redefining Flight. Page 47 was her face smiling calmly, with Nova Air's new Boeing 787 in the background. But Ava didn't flip to that page. She flipped to the article about fuel price fluctuations, trying to keep her mind in the normal zone. A flight attendant approached, smiling. "Good morning. Ma'am, can I get you something before takeoff?" Ava replied softly. "Just water, please." She likes to start her flights with water, old-fashioned. Keeps the mind clear. She once told Marcus. Her co-o-o. From the back seat, the loud laughter of a group of business travelers broke the silence. Ava glanced out the window, the long runway, the sunlight glinting off the fuselage of another plane. In the distance, the desert was a haze of smoke, a fleeting sense of peace, just for a few seconds before the wind suddenly blew in. A voice spoke behind him, high and decisive. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." Ava turned. Standing before her was Elizabeth Crane, ticket in hand, a slightly annoyed look in her eyes, her lips curled in that familiar way of people who always think they're right. Ava smiled slightly and politely replied, "I think this is 1A." Elizabeth glanced down at her ticket. "Yes, and that's my 1A." In that moment, even if it was only for a few seconds, the air in the cabin seemed to freeze. The flight attendant slowed down the serving of drinks. A male passenger looked up, waiting to see what would happen. Ava remained calm, put the magazine down on her lap, and said softly, "Could there be a mistake on your ticket?" "Elizabeth Nwang May. I don't make mistakes with $5,000 tickets. Dear, maybe they upgraded you by accident. These seats are reserved for executive flyers." The flight attendant tried to intervene, but Ava raised her hand, smiling. "It's okay. Let's sort this out." She opened her phone, searched for the e-ticket. At the same time, Elizabeth looked her up and down, her eyes filled with clear appraisal. White shirt, linen pants, non-branded watch, worn white sneakers. In Elizabeth's eyes, this was not the appearance of someone who belonged to first class. Ava knew that look. She'd seen it hundreds of times in boardrooms, in elevators, at the front desks of luxury hotels. The look of someone who believed they knew you, just through your skin. But she smiled anyway. "We'll see who's in the right seat soon enough," Ava said softly. The young flight attendant approached and said softly, "Let me check the manifest. Ladies, we'll get this sorted right away." No one in the cabin knew that the passenger list on the system clearly stated 1A, Morrison, Ava CEO. And that flight was about to be a milestone none of them would forget. Elizabeth Crane always walked into a place as if she owned it. She had the kind of presence that made people step aside, not because of actual power, but because of the confidence honed by privilege. At 48, Elizabeth still maintained a carefully groomed appearance. Her blonde hair was curled slightly, her nails were painted deep red, and the scent of expensive perfume followed her into every room. As she stepped into the first-class cabin of Nova 227, the air seemed to sway slightly. Flight attendant Hannah Brooks paused for a split second. There was something in her voice and her gait that made it clear this woman was used to giving orders, not listening. Elizabeth looked around, her eyes darting around, then stopped at Ava Morrison, the black woman sitting quietly in seat 1A. In Elizabeth's mind, the image was immediately relegated to the category someone who doesn't belong here, not because she was evil, but because of deep-rooted prejudice. Elizabeth's world was the world of old power, a world where white men ruled and women like her were respected only when they stood next to them. And a black woman in a plain shirt and sneakers, not first class. She walked over and tapped the armrest of seat 1A. "Excuse me, sweetheart. I believe that's my seat," she said, her voice sweet as honey but with a hint of iron in it. Ava looked up, her eyes calm, smiling slightly. "I think this is my seat." 1A. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, looking down at her ticket. Yes. 1A. I booked it 2 weeks ago. You must have made a mistake. They sometimes mess up the class with upgraded passengers. Are you an employee? The air in the compartment suddenly turned cold. A couple in row 2 looked at each other, trying to pretend they hadn't heard. Hannah stepped closer, her voice soft. Let me check the list. Mrs. Crane. Elizabeth waved her hand. Just put her in her proper chair. I've had a busy enough morning. Ava remained seated. She didn't shift her position, didn't raise her eyebrows, and said softly enough for others to listen to hear, It's okay. I think we can wait for the results. There was no tension in that voice, but there was something that could not be ignored. Elizabeth felt a little uncomfortable. As Hannah checked the passenger list on her device, Ava turned to face the window. The sunlight framed her face, highlighting her deep eyes and calm forehead. She thought of similar times before in boardrooms, at hotels, in conference halls when someone had looked at her and automatically decided who she was. Ava was used to being judged by her skin color, but it still made her take a deep breath to keep her composure. Elizabeth, not realizing it, continued speaking, her voice rising a little. You know, I fly first class almost every week. Those seats are usually reserved for senior executives or partners of the airline. What department do you work in at Nova Air? Ava turned back, a small smile on her face. I work in a position quite close to senior leadership. Oh, really? Elizabeth sneered. In the customer service department, I always say, good service is the most important thing. But honestly, I think sometimes companies focus too much on variety and forget about efficiency. Ava heard every word. She knew what variety meant in Elizabeth's mouth. It was a word said with subtle contempt. Before she could reply, Hannah returned, holding the list. Mrs. Crane. I checked. Your ticket is 1C, not 1A. It must have been a typo when the card was printed. Elizabeth stopped. Impossible. I always choose the window. I'm sorry, ma'am. But seat 1A belongs to Miss Morrison, Hannah said softly. There was a pause. Elizabeth turned to look at Ava, her smile frozen. She said softly, so only the two of them could hear, Well, enjoy your view then. Then she turned around and sat down in 1C, still upset. Ava just smiled slightly, opened the Forbes magazine, the issue with the article about her, and turned the page, as if nothing had happened. The plane started, the engines roared, shaking the floor. Hannah walked across the cabin, checking her seatbelt. Ava closed her eyes for a few seconds, listening to her breathing and the wind. She wasn't angry, but there was a lingering feeling more sadness than anger. She had thought that once she had built an airline, once she was standing among billions of dollars, those looks would disappear, but they didn't. They just changed shape. While the pilot announced the flight plan, Elizabeth bent down to pick up her tablet and opened her email. A message popped up in the corner of the screen board meeting tomorrow confirmed. We'll need your report ready. The sender's name appears clearly, Richard Vaughn. Ava glanced over, only to see a glimpse of the bright screen. The name made her heart skip a beat. Richard Vaughn, a board member who had opposed all her reforms. He represented the old shareholders who wanted to sell Nova Air to another corporation. Little did she know that Elizabeth being here was all part of Vaughn's plan. Elizabeth was still typing on her computer, her face as cold as steel. She was rewriting the restructuring report, the document that would cost Ava her CEO job if presented tomorrow morning. Ava leaned her head back in her seat and closed her eyes. The cabin lights were soft. The engine hum was steady. 10,000 feet up. Two women sat just a seat apart, one thinking she was about to seize power, the other quietly preparing to defend what she had built. The plane banked slightly, heading east. The sunlight glinted off the metal wings, blinding. Hannah walked by and whispered to Ava, Do you need anything else? Miss Morrison. Ava smiled. No, thank you. I still have water. She touched the glass, the cold drops on the outside like the slow drip of time. In her mind, Ava heard the voice of her late mother, who had said when she was 12, "You will meet many people who think they know you because they see your skin, but don't let their eyes define you. Let your actions do it." Beside her. Elizabeth let out a sigh. Perhaps she was tired too, or a little agitated. Elizabeth had spent her whole life fighting to prove her worthiness in the world of men, and now, before her stood this quiet black woman whose serenity made her feel small. Little did they know that in just a few hours, everything between them would change completely. As the plane streaked across the Texas sky, Ava opened her laptop and typed a few notes. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. A storm was brewing somewhere, and she knew she would be in the eye of it. She looked out the window. The morning sun stretched across the clouds like white silk. Her face was calm in the reflection of the mirror, but her eyes were bright, as if they were on fire. In the first-class cabin of Nova 227, two worlds sit side by side, an old world based on power and prejudice, a new world built on patience and the desire for justice. And the wide sky ahead seems to be waiting to see who really belongs here. As the first-class door closed, the light in the hallway dimmed. The cabin grew warmer and quieter, save for the soft hum of the engines on the floor. Hannah, the chief flight attendant, smiled as she walked down the aisle, checking seat belts. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Nova 227 to New York. Please fasten your seat belts. We'll be departing shortly." The captain's deep voice rang out over the loudspeaker, making the cabin suddenly feel intimate. Ava Morrison sat in 1A, gently adjusting her seatbelt. She tilted her head to look out the window. The sunlight reflected off the wings of the plane, creating long streaks of light. For a few seconds, she felt at peace, the kind of peace that comes from someone who has gone far from where they started, and then returned to the same place, but with different eyes. She took out a small leather notebook from her bag. On the first page was a handwritten line, "Always fly low enough to listen." That was the sentence she had reminded herself from the very beginning of her career. But the peace did not last long. From the back of the compartment, the sound of high heels echoed, clicking rhythmically on the wooden floor. Elizabeth Crane, the woman with the cold smile and steel gray eyes, walked straight to the front row. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting. "That's my seat." Ava looked up. She remained seated, only leaning slightly. "I think this is 1A. "Exactly," Elizabeth replied, holding up the hard copy of her ticket. "1A. I always sit here. Always." The whole compartment was dead silent. The man in row 2 was staring absent-mindedly at his phone. An elderly woman in 1D pretended not to hear anything, but her eyes, reflected in her sunglasses, followed his every move. Hannah approached, her professional smile unchanged. "What's wrong?" "Yes," said Elizabeth, with some emphasis. "This woman's in my seat." Ava kept her voice light as air. "My ticket says 1A. Can you double-check it for me?" Hannah looked at the tablet. A few seconds of silence. "Miss Morrison is in seat 1A. Mrs. Crane is in seat 1C. Elizabeth laughed, a sharp laugh. "Impossible. My assistant knows my preferences. I always have the window." She looked Ava up and down, her eyes filled with contempt. "You must have used miles or some diversity upgrade. That's the only way you got this seat." The words fell on deaf ears like metal on stone. A few of the passengers flinched. Hannah pursed her lips, about to say something, but Ava held up a hand to signal that she didn't need to. "It's okay," Ava said softly. "She's just tired." But inside, her heart clenched. The words, "diversity upgrade," felt like an old knife stabbed back into a half-healed wound. She'd heard them many times before from investors, from partners, from people who didn't believe a black woman could build an airline from scratch. Elizabeth continued, unaware that with every word she spoke, the cabin was slowly freezing. "Sweetheart," she said, lowering her voice so everyone could hear. "You seem like a nice woman, but this cabin isn't cheap. I'm sure economy is very comfortable, too. You should ask the crew to find your seat back there." Ava looked up, her eyes calm but sharp as a well-honed blade. "I am sure I'm not mistaken. Mrs. Crane. If anything is wrong, the system will show." Elizabeth tightened her grip on her handbag. "Well then, your system's wrong." Coquille sang Hannah. "Move her, please. We don't have all day." The voice, cold, commanding, made Hannah take a half step back. She looked at Ava, her eyes worried. "Miss Morrison, Ava just nodded slightly. "It's okay. I'm in my seat." The air in the cabin was thick. The sound of the engine outside echoed through the glass windows in a dull, piercing sound. A passenger coughed, someone whispered, but no one spoke. Ava took a deep breath and turned to look at Elizabeth, her voice still calm. "I understand you value this chair, but this chair, today, belongs to me." Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Ava looked her straight in the eye, calm. "Maybe you could tell me, but before that, do you know who I am?" The question made Elizabeth pause, her lips pressed together. She did not answer, just turned away and whispered, "Unbelievable." Hannah turned to Ava, her voice low. "We'll be closing the door in 2 minutes. Would you like some water while we settle this, thanks?" "I'm fine," Ava said. When Hannah left, Ava leaned her head back in her chair and closed her eyes. She wasn't angry or hurt. She just felt one distinct feeling: tired. Tired of proving, every day, that she deserved to be here. In her head, she heard the voice of Marcus Lee, her closest companion, saying before she left the office this morning, "Don't let them drag you down to their level." "Ava, you've already built something higher?" She smiled slightly, a smile tinged with bitterness. Elizabeth was still sitting upright in 1C, engrossed in texting, not even looking over. She wrote quickly, her fingers tapping the screen board. "Tomorrow, I'll present the plan. Nova Air needs a new direction." Ava glanced over, just enough to see part of the email, and in that moment, she realized this woman was more than just an arrogant passenger. She was a tool in a larger game. The system signaled the doors to close. Hannah did a final check. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Ava pulled her seatbelt, her eyes fixed on the sky. The plane shuddered slightly, sliding slowly down the runway. The engine noise gradually increased. Elizabeth leaned over, adjusted her hair, and took a deep breath, as if she had won a small battle. Ava looked over, saying nothing. She just lightly touched her hand to the table, her fingernails tapping lightly on the wood. 1, 2, 3. A sentence echoed in her head, wordless but clear. "We will meet again. Elizabeth." The plane lifted off the ground. The light through the windows illuminated Ava's face, a halo of light. From above, the Arizona desert stretched out like an old map. Below is the past, where she was rejected, laughed at, and put down. And above is the future, where she will show the world that composure is not weakness, but power. The flight had just begun, and no one in the cabin knew that this would be a life-changing journey for all of them. As the plane steadied at 30,000 feet, Hannah wheeled over the service cart. "Coffee, Miss Morrison." Ava nodded. "Black, no sugar." Elizabeth ordered white wine. "Make it cold," she said, not looking at anyone. 2 women sat just a few feet apart, looking out the same window, but saw 2 different worlds. One saw the blue sky as a symbol of freedom, the other saw only a mirror reflecting power and status. And in the middle of that sky, fate is gently turning, preparing for the moment when everything is turned upside down. The plane had stabilized at 35,000 feet. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a thin gold line across Ava Morrison's face. In first class, the wind and engines blended into a steady, almost lulling background noise. Ava opened her laptop. The screen displayed the report she was preparing for tomorrow morning's meeting. Every line was the work of hundreds of employees, pilots, flight attendants, people who believed an airline could be run by kindness, not just profit. She was reading the Human Experience Index section when a voice cut through her like a cold knife. Excuse me? Can you turn that screen a little? The light's reflecting. Elizabeth Crane. Ava looked up, turning the screen slightly toward her. Sure, she said, her voice soft, but Elizabeth wasn't done yet. She set her glass down on the table and leaned over. I just find it distracting when people bring work on flights like this. You know, first class is meant for resting. Ava smiled. Sometimes work is how I rest. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, smiling slightly. Interesting answer. She glanced at the logo in the corner of the screen, Nova Air Internal, and chuckled. Oh, so you work for Nova? That explains the upgrade. Which department are you in? Sweetheart Ground Service. The word sweetheart fell lightly, but colder than the wind in the clouds. A few customers in the back row glanced over, realizing that something was wrong. Hannah Brooks, the head stewardess, turned back briefly, her eyes worried. Ava gently hung up the phone, her eyes still gentle, but her voice slower and clearer. I'm on a business trip, ma'am. Elizabeth Coignat. That's cute. I have friends at corporate. Maybe I'll mention your name. You seem like you take your job seriously. It's nice to see diversity programs are working. Ava heard every word. She sat up straight, her hands in her lap. For a moment, she didn't answer. There was only the steady hum of the engine, like a slow heartbeat. She recalls the early days when Nova Air was just an idea on paper. She had to borrow money, pitch the project to investors who never looked her in the eye. One of them said, "The idea is good, but I'm not sure customers will feel comfortable with the founder being, well, you know." Ava smiled then, just like she does now, but inside, every word was like a cut. Hannah approached with a tray of drinks. Miss Morrison, would you like more water? Thank you. I'm fine, Ava said. Hannah turned to Elizabeth. Mrs. Crane, is your wine okay? Elizabeth nodded, took a sip, then said loud enough for the whole compartment to hear, I just wish people knew their place sometimes. The air in the cabin dropped several degrees at that remark. A male passenger in row 2 cleared his throat and turned away. Hannah stood still, unsure how to react. Ava looked up, looking straight at Elizabeth. Are you talking about me? Elizabeth shrugged. Don't take it personally. I just think the company should focus more on service than image. Ava smiled slightly, a smile that held no anger, only deep weariness. Do you think service and image are two different things? Elizabeth replied. Of course. You sell comfort, not statements. Hannah took a breath, trying to interject. Mrs. Crane, if you need anything else, I can bring. Elizabeth waved her hand. It's fine. I just don't like people pretending to be what they're not. Ava was silent, but a flood of memories flooded her mind. Standing in the middle of the Nevada desert, overseeing Nova Air's first test flight in the sand and roaring engines. The time an investor laughed at her for daring to fly high. The time she saw the first black child board her plane and smiled brightly as if she had found hope. Ava looked out the window, her voice low, almost to herself. Funny, people spend thousands of dollars to rise above the clouds, but they still can't see past the color of someone's skin. Elizabeth sipped her wine and turned away, pretending not to hear. But a passenger in the second row, a middle-aged white man, looked at Ava differently. He nodded slightly. A silent thank you. The plane shook slightly. The pilot announced some turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign came on, and the pale yellow light. Ava's face was calm, while Elizabeth fell silent, staring straight ahead. Hannah leaned down and whispered to Ava, Are you okay? Ava smiled. I'm fine. It's just too cloudy. As the plane passed through turbulence, Elizabeth put down her glass, shaking slightly. Perhaps it was the alcohol, or something else, but she sighed and muttered, People these days get offended by everything. Ava didn't respond. She opened her laptop again and continued typing away at the screen. She added a line at the end of the core values section. Respect isn't a policy. It's how we fly. A long silence fell over the cabin. Only the sound of the wind was heard. When the plane was stable, Hannah stepped forward again. "Mrs. Crane, Miss Morrison, breakfast is being served," Elizabeth said, her voice still cold. "Bring me the omelet, but make sure it's not cold like last time." Ava smiled. "I'll have coffee. Black, no sugar." Hannah left, leaving the two women sitting side by side in silence. Outside, the blue sky opened up endlessly. Ava looked down at the table, where the sunlight was shining on her cold glass of water, then back at Elizabeth. "I used to believe that the higher you fly, the more generous you become." Elizabeth turned back, her eyes arrogant. "Maybe you're just flying with the wrong crowd." Ava nodded slightly. "Maybe," but another thought flashed through her mind, clear as the distant horizon. She would soon know who she was talking to. The plane continued its journey, crossing the Texas sky. An hour later, as the passengers quieted down, Ava checked her phone to check her email. There was a message in her inbox from Marcus Lee. The subject line was "Short tomorrow's board meeting, important." Ava opened it. The first line stopped her. "Richard Vaughn has brought in an outside restructuring consultant. Her name is Elizabeth Crane." She looked up. Elizabeth was still sitting there, headphones on, eyes closed, as if enjoying her music. Inside Ava, emotions surged. Anger, surprise, then calm. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. She knew her weapon was not anger, but determination. She smiled, a light smile, a smile Elizabeth would never understand, the smile of someone who knows for sure she doesn't need to shout to win. The sky outside was still blue, but inside Ava, a storm was brewing, and she was ready for it. Ava Morrison slid her laptop screen closed. She looked away from Elizabeth. Not out of fear or anger, but because she was used to that look, the look of someone who believes they know your worth in 3 seconds. The plane glided through a sea of clouds, white light illuminating the cabin ceiling. Hannah walked by, adjusting the curtains for the passengers. The smell of coffee and toasted butter wafted in, warm and peaceful. But inside Ava, something was moving silent, powerful, like a river flowing under ice. She placed her hand on the cup of coffee, watched the steam rise, and let her mind drift back to the early days. When Ava was 28, she was just a young aerospace engineer in Tucson, living in a small apartment near the train tracks. She remembers the first night she dreamed about Nova Air not as a company, but as an idea. Everyone deserves to fly without judgment. She didn't even have the money to fly economy class, but she had already imagined the logo, the livery, the flight attendant uniforms. Ava took the blueprint everywhere, from Las Vegas to Dallas, looking for people who believed in it. They shook their heads, they laughed. Some said, outright, "A black woman building an airline." That's not realistic. She still remembers the rainy night when she was first denied a loan. She stood outside the bank, holding the sodden file, staring up at the starless sky. "I'll fly myself," she told herself, and she did. When Nova Air officially took its first flight, Ava piloted a used 737 leased from another airline. She sat in the passenger seat herself, watching the staff serve the first passengers, mostly working families, nurses, teachers, people who had never flown business class before. She knew these were real customers. Now, sitting in first class on that same airline. Ava realized success sometimes doesn't bring the peace she thought it would, because with it, there are looks like Elizabeth Crane's, looks that always remind her that, to some people, she is still other. She was not angry with Elizabeth. There was no room for anger, but she was sad. A sadness as thin as a sheet of paper, cut through the skin so that no one could see it. Ava opened the small notebook in her bag and wrote in blue ink, "Don't respond with anger. Let the truth speak for itself." She closed the book and put it on the table. Beside her, Elizabeth was talking on the phone in a low voice, but enough to catch a few words. "Meeting tomorrow. Richard wants the numbers by noon." The name Richard Vaughn made Ava frown. The pieces began to fit together. The old councilman, who had opposed all her reforms, had a plan, and Elizabeth, the cold advisor, was the chosen piece. Ava took a deep breath. She understood this was no longer just a random encounter on a plane. This was the opening act of a silent war. But she wasn't afraid. Fear had been her constant companion for the first 10 years of her career. At some point, she realized once she'd stood alone in the desert, watching her first plane take off, nothing could ever bring her down again. She looked out the window. The white clouds stretched out like an ocean. In the dim light, her face was vaguely reflected, her eyes were deep and calm, but there was a small, steady light in them like an unquenchable flame. Elizabeth Van Chua Dung Noi. Yes, I'll handle her. She won't last another quarter if we restructure the way I plan. Hannah walked by, glanced at the two, but said nothing. She could feel the tension in the air. Ava turned, her voice soft but clear. The meeting in New York was with the council. Elizabeth paused, then smiled wryly. Oh, you heard that too. I'm just an advisor. It doesn't matter, Ava replied. You sound pretty confident. Elizabeth raised her glass, her eyes arrogant. Confidence is necessary when others depend on you. Ava smiled, bowing her head slightly. I thought so too. No one said anything more. The steady hum of engines, the clicking of keyboards, the sound of wine being poured into glasses. She reopened Marcus's email, reading the last line. Be careful with her. Richard wants to replace the CEO with someone more practical. Ava closed her phone and took a deep breath. In that moment, she didn't feel anger. She only felt responsibility. Responsibility to the thousands of people who believed in her, to the frontline workers who still wore Nova Air's blue uniforms and served with genuine smiles. No, I can't lose this company just because of people who don't believe in human values, she said to herself. Hannah returned with the coffee tray. Miss Morrison, here's your second cup. It's still hot. Ava smiled gratefully. Thank you. Hannah. Their eyes met. Hannah nodded slightly, a wordless nod but enough to say, I see what you've been through. Ava brought the cup of coffee to her lips and took a sip. The bitter, warm taste awakened all her senses. She clearly felt each heavy drop of caffeine slide down her throat, as if reminding her alertness is the most powerful weapon. Within minutes, she wrote a few lines in her electronic diary October 5th on Nova 227. I realized being calm is not weakness. It is a choice. I chose not to scream, not to react, because I knew the truth will speak for itself in due time. She pressed save, closed the computer, and looked out the window. The sun was high in the sky, its light bathing the wings of the plane. Beside her, Elizabeth had fallen asleep, her lips still pursed, her hand clutching the phone. Ava looked at her, her eyes not filled with hatred, only sympathy. She thought of her mother, who had taught her you cannot cure darkness with darkness. Ava leaned her head back in her seat and closed her eyes. In her brief dream in the sky, she saw herself 10 years ago, wiping oil off her hands, smiling as the first plane took off. She knew that tomorrow, in a conference room in Manhattan, Elizabeth and Richard would be waiting for her with a plan of elimination. But she also knew that they didn't understand that her power had never been in her title as CEO, but in what had made her start Nova Air in the first place, the belief that everyone deserved to fly literally and figuratively. Tieng Loa Vang Len, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into New York shortly. Ava opened her eyes, sat up, and buckled her seatbelt. Her face was calm, her eyes bright. She looked out at the sun shining on the Hudson and said softly, as if promising, we'll land safely, me and Nova. Beside her, Elizabeth still hadn't woken up. Little did she know that the woman she had just tried to insult would be the one to decide her own future tomorrow. The plane descended, gliding across the Manhattan skyline. The city shimmered like a moving painting, and in cabin 1A, Ava Morrison closed her eyes, bracing herself for the storm ahead with an unshakable calm. About 10 minutes before landing, the sky above New York began to turn a silvery gray. Beneath the wings, the clouds slowly parted, revealing the horizon aglow with the morning sun. The light reflected off the Hudson River, glittering like shards of glass. Ava Morrison looked out, silent. She loved the descent, the feeling of leaving the clouds and touching the ground. It reminded her that no matter how high you fly, you always need a place to land. Beside her, Elizabeth Crane woke up, her voice sleepy but still patronizing. "Finally, these long flights drain me," she said, pulling the blanket aside. "I always tell my assistant, Nova needs to shorten routes or improve seats. The design feels too basic for first class." Ava turned slightly, her voice calm. "Do you see that? Of course, don't get me wrong, it's good for a mid-tier airline, but it'll never compete with Delta or United. You can tell it's run by people who don't quite understand the luxury market." A smile flickered at the corner of Ava's lips. "You may be right," she replied, "but I don't think Nova tries to be like anyone else. Our goal is to make everyone feel valued. Elizabeth Nin Ko, Hoi Nwang Mei, we so you're with them. That explains the attitude earlier. You must be from the PR department." "Right, sweetheart. You shouldn't take criticism personally." Ava didn't answer right away. She looked at the glass in her hand, tilting it slightly so the light shone through the glass. Then she said softly but firmly, "I don't work in PR." Elizabeth sneered. "Then what do you do?" The question hung in the air. Hannah, walking by, paused, perhaps sensing something. She looked at the two women, holding her breath. Ava turned slightly. Her eyes met Elizabeth's. Her deep brown eyes were calm, without anger, only certainty like the ground after a storm. She spoke slowly, each word clear. "I don't work for Nova Air. I built it." The first-class cabin was dead silent. Elizabeth blinked, not immediately understanding. "I'm sorry." What Ava kept her voice light as she normally spoke. "I am the founder of Nova Air. I am the CEO." A silence fell like a rock. Both Hannah and the passengers in the back row heard it. The middle-aged man who had been looking at Ava earlier tilted his head slightly, his eyes filled with surprise and admiration. "Elizabeth Ty Matt. That's impossible." "The CEO's name is Ava Morrison," she interrupted. "Yes, that's me." Elizabeth opened her mouth to say something, then stopped. She looked around, as if hoping someone would tell her it was a joke, but no. Hannah stood still, nodding in confirmation with her eyes. Ava put down her glass and continued slowly. "You say Nova doesn't understand the luxury market. Maybe it's true. We don't sell luxury. We sell respect to everyone, even those the world tells us don't belong." Her voice wasn't high, but it had the weight of an engine taking off deep, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Elizabeth sat still, her face red. She forced a smile. "Well, that's interesting. I suppose I owe you an apology." Ava just smiled, not bitterly, not gloating. "No need. I'm used to such misunderstandings." She turned to the window, the morning light reflecting off her calm face. "That's why I fly incognito sometimes. I want to know how my staff treat people when they don't know who's sitting in front of them." Elizabeth bit her lip. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. She didn't know whether to apologize or keep quiet. Hannah stepped forward, breaking the heavy atmosphere. "Miss Morrison, we're about to land. Thank you for flying with Nova Air." Ava smiled, her voice soft. "Thank you, Hannah. It was a good flight." Then she looked at Elizabeth and said slowly, "And thank you, Mrs. Crane. Our conversation has been very enlightening." Elizabeth bowed her head and did not answer. The plane began to descend. Through the window, skyscrapers appeared, then roads, rooftops gradually became smaller. The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Local time is 11:10 a.m. Temperature is 62 degrees Fahrenheit." Ava buckled her seatbelt silently. She looked out at the city below, her eyes not just looking but thinking. She knew that tomorrow morning, at the meeting in Manhattan, Elizabeth would appear as Richard Vaughn's new advisor. and this encounter was a gift from fate before the battle. The plane touched down gently. A few passengers applauded. Elizabeth sat up straight, trying to regain her composure. When the signal lights went out, she turned to Ava and whispered, "Listen, about earlier. I didn't mean to." Ava turned, her smile gentle but her eyes still shining. "I know, but sometimes what we don't mean says more than what we mean." "Mrs." Crane was silent. Passengers stood up one by one. Hannah opened the door, letting in light from outside. Ava remained seated, waiting for the crowd to pass. Elizabeth quickly gathered her bags, turned around to say something, then stopped. Ava stood up, adjusted her coat, and picked up her small suitcase. Before leaving her seat, she glanced at row 1C, where Elizabeth had just been sitting, and said softly, just enough for herself to hear, "You can't steal a seat that was built for everyone." She walked out, a slight smile on her lips. At the door, Hannah stood at attention and whispered, "Miss Morrison, I just want to say thank you for keeping so calm." Ava nodded. "We don't have to shout to be heard. Hannah, sometimes we just have to let others hear themselves." She walked down the stairs, the engine still blowing softly, the smell of fuel mixed with the city air. Ava looked up at the sky, where she had just left, then straight ahead. On her face, there was no trace of someone who had just been insulted, only the calm light of someone who had learned to win without putting anyone down remained. And Elizabeth Crane, who had been standing behind her in the line of exiting passengers watching her, felt her hands tremble. For the first time in years, she felt small. The next morning, New York City woke up in a haze. Car horns echoed from Park Avenue, where yellow taxis buzzed like bees in the early morning light. Ava Morrison stood by the glass door on the 30th floor of Nova Air headquarters, looking down at the bustling crowd. She held a cup of hot coffee in her hand, not drinking it, just feeling the warmth spread through her fingers. On the table was a stack of documents she'd been poring over all night: financial reports, layoff plans, and a proposal with the cool title Operational Restructure Proposal, prepared by Elizabeth Crane. The name made her silent for a long moment. Part of her wanted to laugh. Life had a strange way of arranging encounters. But a deeper part of her was silent, not out of fear, but out of regret. Regret that there were people who still thought power came only from the ability to eliminate others. There was a knock on the door. Marcus Lee walked in, laptop in hand. "Ava, they're here." Elizabeth Crane with Richard Vaughn. Ava put down her cup and turned around. "I'm ready." She adjusted her dark blue coat and stepped out into the hallway. Her shoes clicked lightly on the marble floor. Each step was deep and steady, like the heartbeat of someone ready to face a storm. A large conference room opened up before them, walled in glass, overlooking leafy Central Park. 12 leather chairs were arranged around a long wooden table, with the CEO's chair at the head. Elizabeth Crane was already seated beside Richard Vaughn, whispering something. When Ava entered, the conversation stopped. The air shifted like an invisible current. Elizabeth looked up, her face almost expressionless, only her eyes blinking briefly, a brief moment, but enough to betray her confusion. "Good morning," Ava said, her voice low but warm. "Thank you all for coming early." Richard stood up, smiling politely. "Hello. Ava, I think we all know why we're here today. We need to review our financial strategy, and this," he extended his hand toward Elizabeth, "is Elizabeth Crane, the financial advisor I've brought in to support Nova in its restructuring." Ava nodded. "We've met before, haven't we?" "Mrs. Crane." Elizabeth stiffened slightly. "Yes, I suppose we have." Marcus sat down and turned on the projector. Light bounced off the wall, revealing cold graphs and numbers. Elizabeth began her presentation, her voice confident and professional. Nova Air could boost profits by 18% next quarter by optimizing staff, cutting inefficient routes, and simplifying customer service training. In particular, The company's DEI diversity and inclusion program is consuming budget without delivering clear business value. She paused, looked around, and continued. We don't need innovations to appear humane. We need profits, and that, with all due respect, requires a more pragmatic kind of leadership. All eyes turned to Ava. For a second, the room held its breath. Ava said nothing. She just looked at the screen, then back at Elizabeth. Do you have data to prove that philanthropic initiatives don't work? Elizabeth paused. I have cost figures. Value is hard to quantify. Ava nodded, smiling. Yes, hard to quantify, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. She stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote in black pen, Trust your revenue. Mrs. Crane, she said calmly. How many times does the average passenger return to an airline if they are well served? Elizabeth frowned. I don't have that number. I do, Ava said, opening her laptop. 4 times. The average customer comes back 4 times a year if they feel respected. If they feel like an outsider, they never come back and tell at least 6 other people about their bad experience. The room was silent. Ava looked around, her eyes meeting each person. Last night, on the Nova 227 from Phoenix to New York, I was reminded why this company exists. Someone said Nova doesn't understand luxury. Maybe that's true, but we understand dignity, and that's why our customers stay. Several directors nodded slightly. Richard raised his eyebrows slightly, his voice evasive. Ava, I think everyone respects your vision, but the company is under financial pressure. The pressure, Ava interrupted, is inevitable, but cutting away the soul of Nova is not the answer. Ms. Crane wants to lay off over 200 customer service people who support their families and represent the brand every day. If we do that, we will lose the one thing money can't buy, trust. Elizabeth forced a smile. I was merely suggesting a practical course. Practicality demands sacrifice. Ava looked at her, her voice soft, but her eyes still steely. I know what reality is. Mrs. Crane, I've lived it. I once had to mortgage my apartment to pay my employees. But I never sacrificed people for numbers. She paused, took a deep breath. And if anyone in this room believes I would allow that to happen, they don't understand Nova Air and me. The silence stretched. Outside, sunlight bounced off the glass windows and spread across the conference table. Richard looked at Elizabeth, then around. He knew the tide was turning. Ava looked at Marcus. Marcus, show me last quarter's customer feedback. Text messages and letters poured in, passengers praising the staff, saying they felt welcome, that Nova was the first airline to make them feel seen. We have never had a higher loyalty index than this year, one manager whispered. Ava nodded slightly, then said, her voice low and firm, It's not an accident. It's a result of how we treat others, from our passengers to our own employees. Elizabeth bowed her head, her fingers tightening on the pen. Richard leaned back in his chair, sighing. Ava looked straight at them, speaking the last sentence. Slowly, like a hammer striking the silence, Mrs. Crane. I don't need any advisors to tell me how to cut the soul of the company I built with my youth. I need people who understand that real power isn't about who sits in which seat, but how we treat each other even on a plane. For a moment, everyone understood what she meant. Elizabeth looked up, her face pale, her eyes staring. Richard turned away without another word. Ava closed the document, her voice calm. The meeting is over, and from today, Nova Air will not cooperate with any consulting unit that does not respect human values. She walked out of the room, the sun shining on her shoulders. Each step she took was a silent victory. Outside, Manhattan was still noisy. The people still flowed. But inside the building, everyone understood that there were leaders who did not need power to prove themselves. They just needed to stand still and let the truth speak for itself. That afternoon, clouds gathered thickly over Manhattan. The skyscrapers were shrouded in mist, and car headlights cast endless streaks of light on the wet pavement. The Nova Air headquarters building was still lit, In her 30th floor office, Elizabeth Crane sat alone, clutching a file on her desk. The room was so quiet that you could hear the clock ticking. In front of her was a brief email from Richard Vaughn. The meeting did not go as planned. The board voted in favor of Ava. I will withdraw. Do not contact me again. Elizabeth stared at the words, her vision blurring. She tried to read them again, but everything was a blur. She threw the file down on the table, her chair rolling back against the wall. Impossible, she whispered. Someone like her. Beat me. In Elizabeth's mind, the image of Ava Morrison appeared clearly. Calm, slow, voice soft and firm as steel, not angry, not loud, simply stating the truth to silence everyone. The silence killed her. She recalled the moment in the meeting when Ava ended by saying, "True power isn't in which seat, but in how we treat each other, even on a plane." At that moment, the whole room fell silent. And, at that moment, Elizabeth understood she had lost. She wondered when she had become like this, judging people by their status, their skin color, or the numbers on their reports. Perhaps since she had started believing that power was the only proof of worth, but now, that power is melting like sand through fingers. The door opened. Hannah Brooks walked in not as a receptionist, but as a representative from the Human Resources Department. She held a white envelope in her hand. "Ms. Crane," Hannah said, her voice soft but firm. "The board requires you to hand over the documents before the end of the day." Elizabeth looked up. "Ava sent you." Hannah shook her head. "No, she doesn't know I'm here. I just volunteered. I think someone should confront her, not over email." Elizabeth was silent. The young woman before her confused her. No one had ever spoken to her in that tone before. Not contemptuous, not cold, but sincere. "You know," Hannah continued, "on the flight yesterday, people were still talking about what happened in first class. They couldn't believe how calm Miss Morrison was. I think if it had been anyone else, they would have been furious." Elizabeth smiled wryly. "Calm down. That's her way of making me feel small." Hannah looked at her, her eyes soft but steady. "No, it was her way of reminding you of yourself." Elizabeth bowed her head. The words cut deep. For a moment, she remembered her father, who had taught her how to negotiate, how to win. In business, he had said, the stronger man speaks louder, but Ava Morrison didn't say it out loud, and she still won. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Hannah set the envelope on the table. "You can hand it in to the legal department tomorrow morning. They'll remain professional." Elizabeth nodded. "Thank you." Hannah turned away, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Crane, Miss Morrison never had a bad word to say about you. She just said, 'Don't let anyone else suffer what I suffered.' I thought you should know that." The door closed. The room fell silent again. Elizabeth looked around, realizing for the first time how cold the room was. On the table was the photograph of her and Richard from the awards ceremony a few years ago. She picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, then put it down. She didn't cry. Tears wouldn't change anything. There was only a hollowness, heavy as stone, in her chest. The phone vibrated. A new email. Subject: termination of consultancy. Effective immediately. From Ava Morrison. Elizabeth opened it. A few lines, polite, proper, not a single harsh word. At the end, Ava wrote, "Good luck. I believe anyone can fly again if they are willing to land and learn how to take off in the right direction." She read the sentence over and over again, and for the first time in years, Elizabeth felt like listening. That evening, as she left the building, it began to rain. She didn't call a cab. She walked through the park, her shoes soaked, her hair tangled. Each step echoed with defeat and, strangely, with relief. Across the street, the lights of a small shop shone, its sign reading "Fly Again Cafe." She smiled wearily. "Fly again," she whispered. Perhaps fate had a way of teasing people. She walked into the shop and ordered a cup of hot tea. In the steam, she saw her reflection, no longer the powerful woman, but someone learning to start over. A group of Nova Air employees walked by, still in uniform. They laughed and talked about their CEO, about how she had protected them in today's meeting. Elizabeth listened, saying nothing. As they walked away, she whispered, almost as if to herself. She really built it. For a brief moment, she felt something stirring inside her, not jealousy, but hope. A fragile belief that maybe, tomorrow, she too could start over differently. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but in that small cafe, Elizabeth Crane, who had once considered power everything, sat silently, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea, and, for the first time in years, her heart was at peace. Across town, in her apartment overlooking the Hudson River, Ava Morrison also watched the rain fall. She didn't know where Elizabeth was, nor did she think of her with resentment. She only thought of the people working, flying, living for the belief that every person deserves respect. In the sound of the rain, Ava smiled softly and said to herself, "We can all fly again. We just need to let go of what weighs us down." The morning after the rain, New York was bright in the early morning sunlight. The sky was clearer. The drops of water still lingering on the glass windows reflected the shimmering light. The city seemed to have just been washed clean after a stormy night. In Nova Air's 30th floor office, Ava Morrison sat at her desk, her hands clasped together, her eyes staring into the distance. Beyond the window, the Hudson River shimmered like a silver ribbon. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and a hint of wood from the office floor. She had just finished a call with Marcus Lee. They were discussing new plans for Nova Air, plans not just to survive, but to move forward stronger than ever. "We don't need to compete with anyone," she told Marcus. "We just need to remember why we started." Marcus replied curtly, "I understand. It's about people, not profits, not market share." Ava smiled. Exactly. After the meeting, she walked out into the hallway. A group of young employees were passing by, stopping to say hello. "Good morning, Ms. Morrison." Their voices were full of energy. She nodded, smiling warmly. One of the girls, in her 20s, whispered, "I heard your story on that flight. Thank you for making us proud to work here." Ava simply said, "It's not because of me. It's because of all of you that Nova Air deserves the trust of its customers." As they walked away, Ava stood alone. The light fell on her shoulders. A sense of peace spread through her, the first feeling she had felt in 10 years, the feeling that everything was going right. Mid-morning, her phone buzzed. A new email had arrived from an unfamiliar address. The subject line, "Re-thank you," from Elizabeth Crane. Ava hesitated for a few seconds before opening the letter. In the letter, Elizabeth wrote Ava, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to say thank you. You didn't let me down that day. You made me look at myself. I left Manhattan this morning, planning to take some time off, maybe do some consulting for a nonprofit. Your words, 'anyone can fly again,' got me thinking. Maybe I'll start learning how to take off on the right foot. May you and Nova Air always keep that light. Elizabeth." Ava finished reading and was silent for a long time. She didn't know how to feel, maybe a mixture of relief and sympathy. She smiled, clearing her mind of the thought of replying. Some things, she thought, just needed to be left alone. In the afternoon, she had a meeting with the marketing department. They discussed opening new routes, Atlanta, Detroit, Newark, and a special program called Wings of Inclusion. Each flight would have seats reserved for young or disadvantaged passengers as a symbol of equal opportunity. A young employee asked Ms. Morrison, "Should we emphasize that this is the CEO's initiative? It will create a strong media effect?" Ava shook her head. "No need. Let the customer feel it. When something is truly right, it shines through." Everyone fell silent, then applauded. Marcus looked at Ava and said softly, "You know, that's why they follow you. Not because you're the CEO, but because they trust you." Ava smiled slightly and replied, "Trust is the only thing that cannot be bought with money, but it can be lost with just one wrong action." Late in the afternoon, after the meeting ended. She went down to the main hall. A group of employees were preparing for a new service training session. Among them was Hannah Brooks, now promoted to head of cabin crew training. Hannah saw Ava and hurried over. "Miss Morrison, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have believed I deserved this position." Ava smiled, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve it. Hannah, you are a living example of what I have always believed. Kindness is power." Hannah looked at her, moved. "We told your story to our new students. They said they wanted to serve passengers with their hearts, not just with procedures." Ava nodded slightly. "Good. Always remember we don't just take people where they want to go. We bring them back, feeling valued." That evening, Ava left the office after dark. The city was still humming, neon lights reflecting off the glass windows. She stopped at the small park across the street, where there was a statue of a woman stretching her arms toward the sky, the spirit of flight. She looked up, her eyes distant. 10 years ago, she had stood here when Nova Air was just a dream. She had promised herself if I could build this airline, it would not only carry people, but also carry faith. And now, in the middle of the bright city, she realized that promise had come true. She took out her phone and opened Nova Air's social media page. There, a passenger had just posted a photo, a little girl hugging her mother tightly, with the Nova Air logo in the background, with the caption, "First flight ever." We felt seen. The post had been shared thousands of times, with hundreds of comments praising the dedication of the flight attendants. Ava breathed a sigh of relief. She knew what she and her team were doing wasn't just a job, it was a mission. She walked slowly toward the riverbank. The wind off the Hudson was light and cool. Across the river, the lights of New Jersey twinkled like stars. She looked into the distance and whispered, "We're flying right." Overhead, a Nova airplane glided by, its silver fuselage shining in the night. Ava watched it until it disappeared into the clouds. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to truly rest. No anxiety, no defense, no preparation for another fight. Just breathing, knowing she was flying in the right direction. At the small cafe across the street, Elizabeth Crane sat at a table near the window, watching Ava from afar. She didn't call out to her, didn't come over. She just smiled, gently raised her teacup in a silent greeting. Ava paused for a moment, as if sensing his gaze. She turned, meeting Elizabeth's gaze through the glass. They looked at each other without needing words. Two women, once on opposite sides, now understood the same thing: no one could truly win until they learned to let go of their grudges. Ava nodded slightly, then continued walking. It was a long road ahead, but her legs were steadier than ever. Against the night sky, Nova Air's large billboard lights up, "Fly with dignity." She looked up and smiled, and in that smile was the light of a journey. The journey of a woman who had been judged, who had been looked down upon, but who had proven that kindness and determination could lift people above all prejudice. 2 weeks later, early morning in Denver, the sun filtered through a thin layer of clouds, painting the sky a pale pink. On the runway, a Boeing 787 bearing the Nova Air logo prepared for the inaugural flight to Atlanta. A big event, not just a route addition, but a declaration of a new era for the airline. Ava Morrison arrived early. She wore a navy suit and a simple white shirt, no fancy jewelry. In her hand was a cup of hot coffee, the steam rising from it reflecting the light of faith in her eyes. Marcus Lee arrived later, reports in hand. We have press, television, and special guests. I still can't believe we've actually made it this far. Ava chuckled. Me too. But sometimes you have to fly through a storm to know what a calm sky is worth. They walked out to the tarmac, where dozens of Nova Air staff were gathered, wearing brand new uniforms, dark blue mixed with silver. In the middle, Hannah Brooks was instructing a group of young flight attendants, each gesture professional and confident. She saw Ava and hurried over, smiling proudly. "Miss Morrison, everything is ready. I just wanted to thank you for entrusting me with this mission." Ava touched Hannah's shoulder lightly. "Not because I trust you, but because you make me believe in Nova's future." The TV cameras started rolling. A young reporter approached and asked, "Ms. Morrison, how do you feel today as Nova Air opens its first route after its historic restructuring?" Ava looked straight into the camera. Her smile, not one to impress, but the smile of someone who had been through enough pain to understand the value of peace. "Emotions," she said slowly. "I just think about the people who made this happen. The engineers, flight attendants, pilots, ground staff. They are the real wings of Nova Air. I'm just the one to remind them that we are born to fly, not just in the sky, but in our hearts." The reporter was silent for a few seconds, then smiled. "That's beautiful." The flight was named Flight of Dignity, a name that makes anyone who hears it stop for a moment. On the runway, the giant plane shone in the sunlight. Ava climbed the stairs, stopped halfway, and turned to look at the team. The light reflected off her face. She spoke loudly, her voice echoing through the air. "This is more than just a flight. It is a reminder that respect is not a privilege. It is a right for all of us." The applause was loud and long. Hannah looked at her, her eyes brimming with tears. Marcus stood behind her, saying nothing, just smiling, the smile of someone witnessing the birth of a new chapter. When the plane taxied, Ava sat in the passenger cabin, not seat 1A, but in the middle seat, with the staff and a few special passengers. She wanted to experience the flight like a normal person. The 787 lifted off the ground, slowly, then soared. Denver shrank beneath the wings, white clouds spread out ahead. The feeling of lift made Ava's heart slow. She closed her eyes, remembering her first day in the cockpit, her hands shaking with joy. At that time, she had only a dream and a simple belief, an airline that could bring humanity to every flight. Now, looking around, seeing the young staff smiling at the passengers, she knew that dream was no longer an illusion. Hannah walked over, leaned down and whispered, "Someone wants to see you." Ava turned. A middle-aged woman approached, wearing a gray coat and with slightly silver hair. In her hand, she held a ticket that read, "Elizabeth Crane." Ava paused, then smiled. "I didn't expect to see you here." Elizabeth smiled, a real smile this time, not forced. "I happened to see the announcement about the new route. I thought maybe I should start right where it all started, on a Nova flight." Ava nodded. "Welcome aboard." They sat across from each other amid the steady hum of the engine. There was a long silence. Then Elizabeth said, "I'm sorry, Ava, and thank you. I used to think kindness was a weakness, but you made me understand. It's the only power that can change people." Ava looked out the window. The white clouds stretched endlessly. We all learn by falling. The important thing is to get up differently. Elizabeth chuckled. "You still talk like a philosopher." "No," Ava replied, her eyes soft. "I was just a girl who was denied every opportunity. So when I got one, I wanted to use it properly." They were silent. Inside the cabin, Hannah served drinks, the sunlight shining on the silver tray, creating small, shimmering spots of light. A boy, about 8 years old, sitting in the row behind her, dropped his cup of water. Ava turned around and quickly helped him up, smiling. "It's okay, sweetie. I've dropped my coffee cups on planes before." The boy smiled shyly. Elizabeth looked at the scene, shook her head slightly, touched. "You were truly born to do this," Ava replied. "No, I just did what I believed was right." As the plane descended, passengers looked out the windows to see Atlanta, glowing in the afternoon sun. A sense of peace pervaded. Elizabeth stood up and whispered to Ava, "If you need someone to support this humanitarian program, count on me. I want to contribute." Ava smiled. "You don't need to apologize, but if you really want to help, share your story so others can learn what you've learned." They shook hands. It was brief, but genuine. The two women, once enemies, were now companions in the same cause. As the plane touched down, applause broke out. Ava looked around. Everyone's eyes were beaming. She turned to Elizabeth and whispered, "Welcome back to the sky." Elizabeth Japp. "Feels different this time." Ava Gatna. "Because now you're really flying." After the flight, they stepped out of the cabin. Outside, the press was waiting. Hannah and Marcus stood by the plane, smiling broadly at them. A reporter asked Ava, "Ms. Morrison, do you have any message for women who dream of conquering the sky like you?" Ava paused for a few seconds, looking straight into the camera. "Remember this? You don't need anyone's permission to fly. You just need to believe that your wings are strong enough. And when someone tries to take your seat, smile and say, 'I built this airline.'" The crowd laughed, applause mixed with the sound of the wind. High above, sunlight streamed through the wings of the plane, reflecting off Ava Morrison's face. In that moment, she was more than just the CEO of Nova Air. She was a symbol of faith, of kindness, and of the quiet power that changed the sky. 3 months after the Flight of Dignity, Nova Air was thrust into the national media spotlight. The once crisis airline was now being heralded as a model of human leadership. Business magazines, from Forbes to Harvard Business Review, ran stories about how a black CEO transformed corporate culture with kindness and discipline. At a press conference in Washington, D.C., Ava Morrison stood at the podium. Behind her was the silver wings of Nova Air. In front of her were hundreds of people, journalists, business people, employees, aviation students. "I was told that a woman like me couldn't fly," she said in a low, natural, unaffected voice. "But the truth is, we all have wings. It's just that some people are taught to hide them." The whole hall was silent. "I didn't come here to tell my story," she continued. "I came here to say that any of you can rewrite your own story. When you choose respect over prejudice, when you choose to stand up over sitting still, you fly." Thunderous applause. After the speech, a young reporter approached, her eyes filled with tears. "Ms. Morrison," she said, "I was the only African American in my pilot training class. There were many times when I thought I didn't belong, but because of you, I believed I could keep going." Ava took the girl's hand. "Don't just continue," she whispered. "Conquer." That afternoon, Ava left the building in the warm sunshine. Marcus Lee followed, carrying a folder of documents. "Ava, the Department of Transportation has proposed that we collaborate on the Sky Access program, training women and minorities to become pilots." What do you think? Ava smiled, her eyes looking into the distance. "I think it's time more people in America learned that skin color doesn't determine how high you fly." Marcus nodded, smiling proudly. "I still don't understand where you get your energy." After all, Ava looked at him, her voice as light as the wind, "from the things that used to make me fall." That evening, at the headquarters in New York, employees gathered in a large room to watch a special news report about Nova Air. Hannah Brooks sat next to a group of new flight attendants, beaming at the sight of herself in the news. Nova Air has not only changed the process, but also the heart of the aviation industry, said the TV reporter. From an airline criticized for its lack of diversity, Nova has now become a symbol of respect in every flight. A young flight attendant turned to Hannah, "Miss Brooks, is it true that CEO Morrison was robbed of his seat on a plane?" Hannah laughed. "Really? But instead of reacting, she reflects. She makes others reflect. And that's why she soars." The group was silent for a few seconds, then applauded. Meanwhile, in a small town in Maine, Elizabeth Crane was watching the same news in her beach house. Her hair was tied back and she held a cup of hot tea. When the reporter mentioned Ava Morrison's name, she smiled slightly. On her desk was a draft of her new mentoring program, Second Flight, which helps middle-aged women re-enter the workforce. She stopped, looking out to sea. The waves were steady, rhythmic like breathing. "She was right," she said softly. "Anyone can fly again." She opened her laptop and typed a few lines of her introduction. "I used to sit in the front row, but I couldn't see the sky until I was forced to look up from below. In a quiet moment, the wind blew through the curtains, carrying the sound of the sea. The freedom she had lost now returned. A week later, Ava received an email inviting her to attend the Women Who Lead conference in Los Angeles. She accepted, despite her busy schedule, because she knew her voice now belonged not just to Nova Air, but to thousands of women who were trying to stand up. On the flight to Los Angeles, Ava sat in the middle seat, as usual. As passengers began to board, a silver-haired man in a smart suit stopped beside her. "Excuse me," he said. "Could you switch seats with me? I'm used to sitting in the front." Hannah, who was serving nearby, paused. She waited to see Ava's reaction. Ava looked up, a small smile on her face. "Do you like sitting there?" He nodded, a little confused. "Yes, if you don't mind." Ava stood up and offered her a seat. "Of course, please. Every seat goes to the same destination." Hannah looked at her and smiled. As the man sat down, several passengers recognized Ava as the CEO of Nova Air. He blushed and stood up awkwardly. "I didn't know you were—" Ava held up a hand, stopping him. "It's okay. I'm just a passenger today like everyone else." She sat down in the back seat. Hannah leaned over and whispered, "You're still you, no matter what seat you're in." Ava replied, "That's the point." The flight took off. Outside, the clouds were white like cotton fields. The golden light bathed her face. Peaceful, confident, with nothing to prove. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, Ava stepped out into the crowd. No one saw her as the black female CEO who was discriminated against. They saw a simple, energetic woman walking through the crowd as if she were a natural part of the world. At the conference, Ava was invited to the stage with many other female leaders. The host asked Ms. Morrison if you could send a message to your younger self. What would you say? Ava thought for a moment, then said, "I would say, don't let anyone define your worth. When they tell you you're not good enough, smile, because they're afraid to see you soar higher than they thought possible." The auditorium burst into applause. That night, after the event, Ava walked along the beach in Santa Monica. The waves were gentle, the breeze cool. She took off her shoes and let her bare feet touch the sand. Inside, everything was quiet. Across the street, a giant billboard blared Nova Air's new slogan, "No seat defines you. Fly with dignity." Ava looked up, her eyes moist. A simple sentence, but it contained her life's journey, a journey to prove that self-respect is the strongest wing. She walked, shoes in hand, a smile on her lips. In the night sky, a Nova airplane flew by, its lights flashing like moving stars, and the waves crashing against the shore. Ava Morrison knew her story was no longer her own. It belonged to everyone who had been doubted, who had been put down, who had been told they didn't belong here, but had chosen to stand up and fly anyway. It was a foggy morning in Seattle. The weak sunlight filtered through a thick layer of clouds, casting a soft gray hue over the runway. Over at Nova Air's engineering complex, the steady hum of test engines echoed through the air. Engineers in fluorescent vests moved through the steam, oil, and steel smells. Ava Morrison stepped out of the car, wearing a beige trench coat, her face calm. She was here to inspect her latest project, the Nova X-9 fuel-efficient aircraft. It was a strategic project, and also the boldest move since she restructured the company. Marcus Lee was there first, holding the blueprint, his voice filled with excitement. "If the test is successful, we will be the first company in the country to achieve zero emissions by 2032. That's a real legacy." "Ava?" She nodded slightly. "A legacy is only worth something if it doesn't hurt anyone along the way." Marcus smiled. He understood what she meant. For Ava, technology was never above people. The two walked through the testing area where engineers were installing sensors. A petite, curly-haired young woman approached. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Leyland Guyen, a new engineer. Nice to meet you." Ava smiled and shook my hand. "Nice to meet you. Layla, I've been where you are. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, just afraid of not learning from them." Layla blushed and nodded. Thank you. That quote, I'll probably engrave it on my desk. Marcus laughed. Go ahead, as long as there's room on the desk. Everyone laughed. Amid the cold industrial landscape, the air warmed. Ava looked around, her eyes filled with pride. 10 years ago, she had been the only woman in another company's engineering department ignored, pushed aside. Today, she saw young faces on her team, of all colors and accents. That afternoon, a small press conference took place in a glass room on the top floor of the new terminal. The press booths were packed. Ava stepped up to the podium and began in a calm voice. The Nova X-9 is more than just an airplane. It is a symbol of how we treat the planet and each other. A reporter asked, do you think investing too much in green technology will increase costs? Ava smiled. If we just look at the cost in Excel, the answer is yes. But if we look at the cost to future generations, the answer cannot be any other way. The room was silent. A few people bowed their heads and took notes. The sentence would appear in hundreds of newspaper headlines the next day. When the meeting ended, Hannah Brooks appeared, holding the crew list for the first test flight. Miss Morrison, everyone is waiting for you in the hangar. Ava followed Hannah onto the runway. The sky was beginning to brighten. A light breeze was blowing, carrying the salty scent of the ocean from Puget Sound. The Nova X-9 stands tall, its body covered in matte silver paint, its newly redesigned wing logo more delicately, neat, elegant, just like the philosophy that Ava pursues. Before boarding the plane, she stood still for a moment, silently admiring it. Pride and humility were mixed in her eyes. It's strange, she said softly. Every time I see a new plane, it still feels like the first time I see a miracle. Hannah smiled. You made it happen, Miss Morrison. Ava shook her head. No, we all do it together. The test flight took off. Ava sat in the passenger seat, next to Captain David. She said nothing, just watched the dashboard light up with numbers outside the window. Seattle shrank, thick white clouds opening up to a deep blue sky. David turned steady. All parameters are perfect. Ava smiled. Good. Now, let's fly like the sky is our home. She finished speaking and fell silent. A tear rolled down the corner of her eye. No one saw. She remembered the long nights in the office, the wordless battles, the people who doubted her, and the wounds that forced her to become stronger. And now, under this sky, she felt like everything was returned. When the plane landed safely, the crowd on the runway applauded loudly. Ava stepped off the plane, the afternoon sun shining on her face. Hannah ran to hug her. Layla cried with emotion. Marcus stood far away, holding his phone to record the moment, not to post it online, but to keep it for himself. That evening, Ava threw a small office party. No champagne, just pizza and soft music. People laughed, told stories, and shared memories. In the middle of the party, Hannah approached Ava and placed a small card in her hand. Miss Morrison, someone asked me to give this to you. Ava opened it. There were only a few handwritten lines inside. I watched the press conference. You turned your kindness into strength. I'm proud to have seen you fight. Elizabeth Crane. Ava finished reading and smiled slightly. She looked out the window at the city of Seattle, which was bathed in night lights. An indescribable feeling of warmth filled her heart. She stepped out onto the balcony and took a deep breath. The air was cold, but her heart was at peace. Below, the runway stretched like a strip of light. A Nova airplane had just taken off, its lights flashing in the night sky. Ava whispered, "Fly safe, everyone." And, as if in response, the sound of the engine faded away, blending into the sound of the wind. She smiled slightly and closed her eyes. Every memory, from the moment her seat was stolen to today, played in slow motion in her mind. There was pain, there was pride, there were tears, but most of all, there was gratitude, because if it weren't for that day, she wouldn't be the person she is today. One April morning, the sun spread golden light across the New York sky. Nova Air had just celebrated its 10th anniversary since its reestablishment. Silver ribbons hung in front of the headquarters, and each glass window reflected the light, sparkling like thousands of little birds. Ava Morrison stepped out of the car, wearing a light coat, holding an old leather notebook. She always carried it with her, the one she started writing in when she first founded Nova Air. Each page was a milestone plans, failures, and short diary entries about her undying faith. Marcus Lee was already waiting in the lobby, his face filled with childlike excitement. "Ava, you have to see this." He turned on the big screen, showing the latest video of the Wings of Inclusion campaign. The images that appeared were Real Faces engineers, flight attendants, passengers, students in Nova Air's scholarship program. The voice of a brown-skinned girl rang out in the clip. "I want to be a pilot, because I saw someone who looks like me flying on TV." The room fell silent. Ava looked at him, her eyes lighting up. "Who was that girl?" Marcus smiled. "Her name is Janelle. She grew up in New Orleans and thought her dreams were too far away. Then she saw her picture on the news 3 months ago. Now she's taken our free flight training class." Ava was silent. She gently placed her hand on her chest, feeling her heart beat. A strange feeling rose up in her, not the pride of a CEO, but the emotion of a mother seeing the next generation continuing the dream she once pursued. Marcus turned. "Ava, you know the best thing for the first time. Nova Air is more than just an airline. It's a story people want to tell their children." She smiled. "That's the dream. Marcus, not profit, legacy." That afternoon, in the small office of the community department, Hannah Brooks was holding a staff meeting. She invited Ava as a surprise guest. When Ava walked in, the room erupted in applause. On the wall was a handwritten banner, "Thank you for giving us wings." Ava smiled, a little shyly. "I'm not giving you wings. I'm just reminding you that you already have them." Hannah stepped up and took the microphone. "Miss Morrison, I want to tell you a little story. There was an old passenger who told me that the Nova Air flight was the first time he had ever been called by name at the gate. He cried about it, and he said, 'I thought I was just a nobody, but they made me feel seen.'" Ava nodded, her eyes moist. "That's why we fly. Not to take people where they want to go, but to make them feel valued." The room fell silent. A few staff members wiped away tears. Hannah looked at Ava and whispered, "Thank you for making us believe that kindness still has a place in this world." That evening, after the meeting, Ava returned to her Manhattan apartment. The city was still noisy, the traffic was still busy, but inside the room, everything was strangely quiet. She turned on the desk lamp and opened the leather notebook. Today's page had only 3 lines. "I'm not afraid of heights anymore. I'm only afraid of not flying." She put down her pen and looked out the window where the lights of Times Square reflected off the clouds. In the distance, she saw a Nova airplane fly by, its lights flashing like a heartbeat. Suddenly the phone rang. It was Marcus. "Ava, I know it's late, but there's someone special who wants to talk to you." She heard a woman's voice on the other end, deep and warm. "Ava, this is Elizabeth Crane." Ava was a little surprised, but quickly smiled. "Elizabeth, it's good to hear your voice. How are you?" "I'm fine. And I want you to know, the second flight program is officially open. Today, we have 12 senior women signing the first contract. One of them said that she dreamed of working at Nova Air. Now she's being trained by me to start over. Thank you for instilling in me the belief that it is never too late to change." Ava was silent for a few seconds. Her voice trembled slightly. "I only opened a door. You were the one who walked through it." Elizabeth smiled. "Perhaps, but you are the one who shows the way." The call ended. Ava sat silently for a long time. She realized that sometimes true victory is not when you overcome others, but when you make the person who once opposed you learn to love. The next morning, Ava took a business trip to Texas, Nova Air's first flight for disadvantaged children under the Sky for All program. On the plane, she met up with little Janelle again, now dressed in a pilot cadet uniform. Janelle sat in the chair next to her, her eyes sparkling. "Ms. Morrison, when I saw you on TV, I thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too." Ava gently placed her hand on her shoulder. "And you will, Janelle. Just remember one thing every time someone tells you you can't. Smile and think, they don't know how high I can fly." Janelle laughed, her eyes welling up. "I will." As the plane took off, Ava looked out the window at the deep blue sky, white clouds layered like waves. In that light, she saw herself again, the girl who had sat in the last seat of the flight and was told this seat is not for you. She whispered, "Look at us now." Hannah walked over and asked softly, "What did you say?" "Miss Morrison." Ava smiled. "I'm just thanking the sky." The plane flew into the sunlight, leaving a long white trail of smoke, like an invisible line in the air we all can fly. Autumn returns to New York. Fall leaves fill the walkway leading to Nova Air headquarters. The wind is chilly, but the air inside the building is unusually warm. Dozens of photos of employees, engineers, flight attendants, ground staff are hung on the glass wall of the lobby, with the small text below, "They keep us flying." Ava Morrison paused before the photos. She smiled, touching the frame of an older man in a gray uniform. He was Thomas Reynolds, Nova Air's first gatekeeper, who had been there since the airline's small office. Today, he retires. Ava decided to go down to the ground floor herself to see him off. Thomas stood there, thin but his eyes still bright. When he saw her, he laughed. "I thought you were busy with a meeting, but I didn't expect you to come down to see an old man like me off." Ava replied, "You're not just a gatekeeper. Thomas, you're the first person to greet me every morning, and the last person to say, 'Have a good night, ma'am,' when I leave. Nova Air is built on people like you." Thomas was emotional, his hands shaking as he held the Nova Air badge Ava gave him. "I've never flown with the airline," he said, "but I feel as proud as if I've flown with you for 10 years. Ava laughed, her voice hoarse. "You don't need wings to fly. Thomas, you lift us up every day." As he walked out the door, everyone applauded. Ava stood still, watching him, feeling a strange feeling, both grateful and sad. She realized that every great journey was built by the people who quietly stayed on the ground. In the afternoon, Ava has a brief meeting with Marcus Lee and Hannah Brooks. They discuss opening a new training center in Houston. Marcus flipped through the files and said, "We have thousands of applications. I think this program will create a new generation of pilots, the most diverse in America." Hannah added, "I would add service ethic training, not just learning how to serve, but learning how to listen. We are different, and we need to keep that." Ava nodded. "Do it. Nova Air exists not because we fly faster, but because we fly more humanely." The room was silent for a moment. Marcus looked at Ava and said softly, "Have you ever thought, if your seat hadn't been stolen that day, would things have been different?" Ava looked out the window, the late afternoon sunlight illuminating the building across the street. "Maybe I'll still be CEO," she said softly, "but I won't be this person. Sometimes losing a seat helps you find your place." Hannah smiled. "That should be on a billboard." Ava smiled, but her eyes were distant. She still felt a pang of nostalgia, not for the wound, but for the journey. She knew she was living in the best moment, but at the same time she could feel its fragility. That evening, after everyone had left, Ava was alone in her office. The yellow light cast a soft glow on the wooden desk. On the desk was a familiar leather notebook, and next to it was a new letter from an anonymous employee. She opened it. "Ms. Morrison, I'm a night maintenance worker. I used to think I was just a screw fixer. But yesterday, when I saw a passenger post a picture of little Janelle learning to fly, I realized maybe the screw I tightened is keeping that plane safe so she can pursue her dream. Thank you for making me believe that my work matters." Ava finished reading and was silent for a long time. She looked out and saw that the airport was still lit up despite the late hour. In that light, hundreds of people were still working, Engineering, maintenance, cleaning, inspection, all contributing to the flights taking off tomorrow. She whispered, "They are the real soul of Nova Air." A moment later, the phone rang. It was Elizabeth Crane. "Ava." Her voice was warm. "I heard today is Thomas Reynolds' farewell day. I miss him, the one who always opened the door for me when I first came to Nova Air." Ava smiled. He was the same, polite and warm. Elizabeth lowered her voice. "You know, I'm writing a new book. The Quiet Leaders, about people who don't have high titles, but have lasting influence. I want to dedicate a chapter to him and to you." Ava was silent. She felt genuinely touched. "Thank you, Elizabeth. But if you want to write about me, write about all of them, because I can only fly because they keep me from falling." On the other end of the line, Elizabeth laughed. "I think that will be the chapter title, The Ones Who Keep Us Flying." After the call ended, Ava stepped out onto the balcony. The city was strangely beautiful tonight. The breeze was gentle. The lights were like a galaxy in the city. From afar, the sound of a plane taking off echoed, deep and steady like a heartbeat. She remembers the first day she started this journey, just her and a few young colleagues, fragile faith and constant fear. Now, everything is different. Nova Air is more than just an airline. It is proof that when people are respected, they can build the sky. Ava said softly, as if to all the people working silently down there, "Thank you for keeping us flying." She looked up at the sky. A falling star streaked by. She made no wish, because she knew she was living in that very wish. That winter, a sudden snowstorm swept through the eastern United States. Airports closed down en masse. News reports showed stranded passengers, canceled flights, and whiteout runways. At Nova Air headquarters in New York, the red emergency lights were flashing. Ava Morrison had been there since 4 a.m., wearing a heavy coat, her hair pulled back into a bun, clutching a cold cup of coffee. In the control room, Marcus Lee's voice came over the radio. All flights diverted safely. "We only have 2 flights left to land Flight 417 from Chicago and Flight 622 from Dallas, both in deep snow." Ava stood in front of the radar map, the green light illuminating her face. "Stay in touch on the intercom," she said curtly. "Don't move unless necessary. Don't let the pilots feel like they're alone out there." Outside the window, snow was falling heavily. The wind was whipping against the glass. The sound was like the roar of the sea. In that moment, Ava felt something small. People in the sky, always in a fragile relationship between trust and fear. Around 6 a.m., the first message came and Flight 417 had made an emergency landing in Pittsburgh. Passengers safe. Everyone in the room breathed a sigh of relief. But there was Flight 622, no signal for 10 minutes. The air froze. Marcus frowned. "We lost contact with the pilot. Radar is only faint." Ava moved closer to the screen, her voice strangely calm. "No one moves. I'll go on the radio." She held the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "Flight 622. This is Nova Control. I am Ava Morrison. If you can hear me, please confirm." Silence. Then a crackle. After a few seconds, the pilot's voice came through faint. "But there. This is 622. 1 engine ice. Visibility almost 0. We're descending to get out of the storm," Ava replied. "I understand. Keep heading 230 degrees. Don't try to reach over. The lower winds are better. I'll stay here with you." She continued, her voice steady and steady like an anchor in a storm. The room was silent except for the wind and Ava's voice. She didn't shout, didn't give orders, just spoke each sentence as if holding their hands in the white sky. 10 minutes later, the radar signal stabilized. Flight 622 had cleared the storm, making an emergency landing in Philadelphia. The room erupted. Hannah Brooks hugged Marcus, tears streaming down her face. One of the staff members burst into tears. Ava stood still, eyes closed, breathing slowly. One whispered, "Miss Morrison." They're safe. Ava opened her eyes, a small smile appearing on her face. Good. Now, call each pilot. Let them know the ground is still waiting for them. In the evening, when the snow stopped falling, Ava remained at the headquarters. She walked around the maintenance area where the staff was checking the equipment after the storm. A young engineer saw her and was surprised. Miss Morrison, you haven't gone home yet. You should rest. It's cold. Ava smiled. I know, but I don't want to leave until all the planes are checked. They were out there for me. Now it's my turn to be here for them. The engineer bowed his head, moved. Actually, I used to work for another company. I've never seen a CEO come all the way here in the middle of a storm. Thank you. Ava just smiled, then kept walking. In the pale yellow light, her shadow stretched across the cold concrete floor. As she left the engineering area, her phone rang. It was Elizabeth Crane. Ava. Her voice trembled. I saw about the storm. Are you okay? I'm fine. Ava said. Everyone's fine. The sky's as harsh as ever, but it's forgiven when you respect it. Elizabeth smiled through her tears. Hearing you say that reminds me of myself 10 years ago, believing I could control everything. But you are different. You don't control. You understand, Ava replied softly. I used to think strength was in holding things in your hands. Now I know strength is in letting go and still believing. After ending the call, she returned to the office. The snow had stopped. The sky was clearer. Silver moonlight streamed through the windows, covering the desk, the cold cup of coffee, the old leather notebook. She opened it and wrote a new line. When the wind stops, we see the stars clearly. When people stop being afraid, we see ourselves clearly. She gently closed the book and leaned back in her chair. Her heart was no longer filled with the fatigue of a leader, but with the peace of someone who had just kept the faith of an entire team. Late at night, Marcus returned with 2 cups of hot tea. You're still not asleep? Ava took the tea, smiling. Not yet. I was thinking about the people out there, the passengers, the pilots, the engineers. Each of them is a part of this sky. Marcus sat down beside her, his voice low, I think. Someday. People will tell about tonight as the story of when the CEO stayed with the team in the blizzard. Ava chuckled. They may forget my name, Marcus, but if they remember that faith is stronger than fear, that will be enough. Outside, snow covered the runway, but the sky was lightening. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the clouds, reflecting off the planes that had slept soundly after a long night. Ava stood up and looked out the window. The sun was rising, its light illuminating the silver lettering on the fuselage of a 787 Nova Air, Fly with Dignity. She smiled. A new day had begun, and, as always, it began with hope. It was a crisp spring morning. The sky over New York was a mirror blue. Nova Air was hosting the biggest event in its history, its 15th anniversary. The main hall was flooded with light, displaying large-scale photos that told the story of the journey from the first flight, the crises, to the simple smiles of staff around the world. Ava Morrison walked into the hall, her steps slow, her eyes sparkling, no longer the nervous CEO from her first meeting, but a mature, serene woman. Today, she did not wear her usual black suit, but chose a soft cream-colored AO dye. It's time to breathe again, she whispered to Marcus Lee as he came to greet her. Marcus laughed. First time in 15 years I've seen you eat breakfast before an event. Ava chuckled. For once, I don't feel like I need to prove anything. The event began. A video was shown on the big screen recreating Nova Air's journey, interspersing images from the day Caroline Bell took over the seat, to the airline's transformation. No one in the audience knew the real story. Only a line appeared. Every fall teaches you how to fly higher. The room fell silent. Then there was thunderous applause. Hannah Brooks, now the director of customer service, came up to the stage and introduced Ava. The woman you are about to meet didn't just build an airline. She built belief that human dignity can fly. Ava stepped forward. the yellow light shining down. She didn't read her prepared speech. Instead, she told a story. 15 years ago, I was told that the seat I was sitting in was not meant for me. And that's right. That seat was not meant for me. It was meant for someone who still believes in fairness, in respect, in kindness. That person could be any one of you here today. The sky does not choose anyone. It opens only to those who dare to fly. The whole room stood up. Applause was thunderous. The camera panned to every emotional face, from the engineers, the flight attendants, the doormen to the young people of the Sky for All scholarship program. In the front row, Janelle Brown, now a Nova Air trainee pilot, wiped away tears. Marcus Lee was silent, his eyes filled with pride. Elizabeth Crane sat near the back of the auditorium, clutching a notebook, tears streaming down her face. The ceremony continued with the recognition of the quiet leaders, the silent people who created the foundation of Nova Air. Thomas Reynolds, although retired, was also honored first. He stepped onto the stage, leaning on his cane, and said briefly, "Thank you, Ms. Morrison. I only hold the door, but you are the one who opens it." Laughter broke out through her tears. Ava bowed her head in thanks. In that moment, she knew that all she had done was not in vain. After the ceremony, people gathered in the outdoor courtyard. The sky was clear and the wind was light, and Nova airplanes flew by, leaving white trails of smoke in the deep blue sky. Ava stood on the balcony overlooking the runway. Marcus walked over and placed a small envelope in her hand. "There's something you might want to see." She opened it. Inside was an old, yellowed fax. In the corner was the date 2010, the day Caroline had taken her seat that year. The words on the paper read, "To Ms. Morrison. Keep your head high. You'll need it for the sky." There was no sender name. Ava looked at the words for a long time, then whispered, "Maybe. Someone believes in me even when I don't believe in myself." Marcus smiled. Maybe the sky sent it. That afternoon, Ava left the event early. She drove out into the countryside to a small airport where Nova Air was holding community flying lessons. She saw children running around, laughing. Among them, Janelle was leading a group of students. "Miss Morrison," she exclaimed when she saw Ava, "I just taught them how to operate the steering wheel." Ava smiled, sitting down next to the kids. "Did you know? When I was your age, I was afraid of flying." A white boy with curly hair opened his eyes wide. "Really? Then why are you no longer afraid?" Ava looked up at the sky, the last light of day reflecting off her eyes. "Because I realized fear is just a feeling on the ground. When you fly, you feel only freedom." The group fell silent, as if the sky before their eyes suddenly became wider. A little girl asked, "Teacher, how can I fly like you?" Ava smiled gently. "Don't fly to prove anything. Fly because your heart won't stay still." The afternoon was fading. The dusk was settling on the small runway. Children were running around. Laughter echoed in the orange sky. Ava stood up and whispered to Janelle, "You know, this is the best part of flying, teaching others to spread their wings." Janelle nodded, her eyes shining, "And you were the first to teach me that." Ava smiled, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Then keep flying. Janelle, the world still needs skies like yours." As the sun set, Ava returned to the car. She looked in the rearview mirror. The children were still playing, the laughter still ringing. Overhead, a Nova airplane flew by, silhouetted against the brilliant sunset. She opened the old leather notebook one last time. The last page was blank. She wrote, "The sky does not belong to me. I was just the person it trusted for a time. And today, I pass that trust on to the new generation." She closed the book, letting the wind blow away a few strands of hair that were on her cheek. Her eyes shone with a peace that only comes from someone who has gone through all the storms, who understands that victory lies not in reaching the top, but in lifting others up with her. A small voice echoed in her head, her own voice years ago in the first-class cabin when her seat was snatched away someday. They'll know who I am, now." She smiled slightly, replying, "They don't need to know. They just need to fly." And as the Nova Air disappeared into the clouds, the sky gradually turned purple. A new chapter of the dream began, not only for Ava Morrison, but for all those who once believed that kindness can change the sky. Ava Morrison, the story is more than just one black woman's journey to success. It's a mirror of anyone who has ever been overlooked, or judged by their appearance rather than their true worth. The most important message of the story is that dignity is not determined by status, but by how we respond to injustice. Ava does not retaliate with anger, but chooses to respond with calmness, wisdom, and kindness. In today's world, where judgment often comes before the truth, the story reminds us to not let others determine your worth. It's also a reminder to those who have been in the upper seat that real power lies not in where we sit, but in how we treat the person sitting next to us. No matter our age, we can all learn to listen, respect, and see the value in others, because in doing so, we make the world a more open and warm place. If Ava's story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread better values every day. Thank you for staying, listening, and empathizing, because kind stories still deserve to be told, and the sky is always wide enough for all of us to fly.